Good morning, everybody. It's Colin Ellis here. Welcome to another Culture and Coffee podcast on Monday, the 24th of July, 2023. And today on the podcast, to give chirpy start to the day, I'm going to be talking about 3 ways in which culture stagnates. So I'm going to start off super cheery, and then I'm going to deliver a real doom and gloom podcast in the normal, light-hearted way that I would talk about this stuff. So that's what you've got to look forward to for the next 20 odd minutes or so. So let's start with the coffee, which I bought yesterday from my favourite little coffee bar. So I wanted to give a little shout out to Corey at the Cold Brew Coffee Bar. So if you're in Melbourne, in Australia, and why wouldn't you be in winter? It's absolutely freezing. Not much rain, so that's good news. You want to head up to the Cold Brew Coffee Bar, which is on Albert Street in Brunswick. And there's a tram stop right nearby, so don't drive, people. Get the tram. There's a train station not far away as well. And head up to the Cold Brew Coffee Bar. I spent good, 30, 40 minutes chatting with Corey yesterday. It's always great. I love these little community coffee shops. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not that I've got anything against the big chains necessarily. Well, I do have something against them when they, the customer service is rubbish and they make a crappy coffee, in which case then I do. But they generally don't, I've had my fair few Starbucks, particularly in North America, I have to say, when you do a drive-by coffee. The Cold Brew Coffee Bar is a little community coffee place, fabulous little place. Anyway, while I was there, I picked up some beans. So this week's coffee is a Guatemalan Santa Rosa, roasted by Beat Coffee. Beat Coffee are a place called Reservoir in the northern suburbs of Melbourne. And someone asked me a question actually about whether I always say I buy beans. Do I never buy them ground? Well, we have a grinder at home, and that's kind of old habits die hard from when we used to have a coffee shop in Wellington. So we kind of learned how to get the right grind, and I don't know, there's still a little bit of me that thinks that I'm a barista. Although, truth be told, I rarely made a coffee when we had a coffee shop. I was the front of house guy, and I know you'll find that hard to believe, but I was the guy, hey, good morning, how you doing? How's your day so far? Oh, is that your little child? Here, let me amuse them while you enjoy 30 minutes apiece. I was that guy. And listen, I could make a coffee, and I could grind beans, but nobody ever seemed to let me do that. Yes, a Guatemalan Santa Rosa. Let me just have a quick taste of this here. Managed to steam up my glasses. There we go. That's how chilly it is here. And that's really nice, actually. It tastes quite chocolatey. It says on the packet here. Oh, yeah, there you go. So milk, chocolate, and stone fruit. I wasn't sure that I was getting stone fruit. Maybe sometimes I think you just taste what you want to taste. I went for a whiskey at my favourite whiskey bar, Whiskey and Ailment. I'm giving everyone a shout out. If you want to advertise on this show, just let me know. And I was there, and he poured me this delicious whiskey. It was absolutely gorgeous. Lockie poured me this whiskey. Hello, Lachlan, if you're listening. Just started his own podcast, Whiskey and Ailment. Just started his own podcast. He's super. It's really good. And I took a sip, and I was like, oh, I'm really getting. And he said, what are you getting? And I told him. He's like, oh, that's interesting. Which basically is his way of saying, yeah, that's not it at all. I don't know what your palate is, but it's definitely not that. And then they'll do these things taste different to different people, which made me feel just completely and utterly dumb. Anyway, let's go on with the podcast. Definitely chocolatey. Really, really nice. Some interesting things about Guatemala. I thought, what better way to start a podcast than giving you some Guatemalan statistics? The most populous country in Central America. There you go. I didn't know that. The name Guatemala. I'm fascinated by stuff like this. I've just bought a book on all the different cultures of the world. I really want to develop my anthropological view, and because I do, and I'm approached to do work with different countries, it's really important that I understand kind of the indigenous population and kind of where they come from. It's really important to me. I know, I might be going over and above. It's just a workplace culture, but it's really not, right? There's a lot to it, including kind of the fabric of a country. So yeah, I'm fascinated by names. And so the name Guatemala is an indigenous name which either means land of trees, which is nice, or mountain of vomiting water, which I know which I prefer. I don't know about you. Where do you live? I live in the land of trees. Oh my God, that sounds amazing. Where is it? Guatemala. Where do you live? I live in the land of vomiting water, the mountain of vomiting water. Great. Okay, see you later. So the vomiting water is obviously a reference to the volcanoes in Guatemala, which obviously, coffee grows best in that high altitude volcanic soil. It's natural. This is the really interesting bit. The national bird is the quetzal, Quetzal, the quetzal, which is also the name of its currency. So I don't know many countries in the world where the name of the national bird is the name of the currency. You get 8 quetzals to $1. I'm not making this up. It's totally true. If anyone's listening in Guatemala, they'll confirm it for me. They'll be all over LinkedIn on Monday going, it's Colin, so true. He's really, working hard for the Guatemalan Tourist Board. Do you still have tourist boards? I don't know. Yeah, so yeah, the name of the national bird. That gets me thinking. So what's the national bird of the UK? Probably the robin. So, instead of paying in pounds, you're paying robins. The US would be the bald eagle, I think. Not the American eagle. That's retail. That'd be free advertising paying in American eagles. They sell a lot more clothes, probably. Australia, what would it be? Oh, it would be the emu, wouldn't it? That's on the badge. So instead of Aussie dollars, we'd have Aussie emus, which sounds weird. Where else? Where's the dodo from? Mauritius. I know that because I've done a speech there. The dodo is from Mauritius, and everything in the gift shop was a dodo. And my daughter, she used to collect snow globes, she still does. Actually. I bring her a snow globe back when I do a speech in a country. She's got like this whole bookcase full of snow globes, and obviously it's a dodo. So yeah, Mauritian dodos. Anyway, let's talk about what you actually want to listen to. I don't know. Maybe you want to listen to all of that. Maybe you're like, you know what? I just need a high energy pep talk from a guy who hasn't even had a coffee yet properly, and he just seems to wake up. Good night's sleep always does that to you, right? Got one job as an adult: put yourself to bed early. Anyway, yeah, 3 ways culture can stagnate, and so I've been talking a lot recently about toxic cultures. That's because I'm writing the book at the minute. I've got like 5 weeks, 6 weeks to get the manuscript finished on that. And my sense is I would say I've only ever worked in one toxic culture, and I chose to leave that culture. That was listen, I tried to change it, but I chose to leave it. But I think I've definitely worked in some cultures that have stagnated, and I think a stagnant culture and a toxic culture are really quite different. Stagnant cultures don't become toxic because people just don't care enough. Do you know what I mean? Like a stagnant culture is just a bit, same shit, different day. That's a stagnant culture where there just isn't the level of engagement. And and this can happen in all types of cultures, like in sports teams where people are just a bit, I worked with one sports team and everyone was a bit, yeah. Now, partly that was a problem with, one element of the culture, which I'll talk about in a second. But people were very apathetic in that instance. The coach was the coach was a good guy in that scenario, but the team were just a bit apathetic. Office-based cultures, you walk in, it's just silent, like no one's really talking to each other, or you're on a virtual call and everyone's got their cameras off and no one's really asking any questions, and it's all a bit, and you think, oh, I don't know why I bother. Do you know what I mean? You get some of you on the way to work going, I know exactly what you mean. That's exactly what I'm going into today. People just don't care. And it's different, like toxic cultures, I often think people care, but their just behaviours are appalling, and it creates this toxicity, and then eventually people disconnect and it can stagnate as well, and that's the worst kind of culture, like a toxic, stagnant pool. That's awful. I hope none of you are working in that. It's terrible. So I thought, I'd give you the because, one of the things that I see is cultures will just stagnate over time. It's not like one day you wake up and you go to work, I don't know, you might be working in the music industry or, technology or a sports team or whatever it might be. It's not like one day you go in and it's just, it like changed overnight. You kind of, there's just some things that you can see, it just gradually erodes. Do you know what I mean? Um, and sometimes you don't really see the problem right in front of you. It's just like one day, it's just like, well, how did we get to this? I think that's the difference. Often with toxic cultures, you're like, we need to cut that out really, really quickly. Like, that's bad. It's broken. We need to fix it. We need to fix it now. Whereas with stagnant cultures, it's just like something doesn't feel right. Something feels a bit off. So I thought I'd give you kind of three of those signs. And these are all based on my own experiences. These are based on organizations that I've worked with, particularly over the last 5 or so years. And often there's a bit of root cause analysis for me to do before I actually do like either a culture workshop or I work kind of one-to-one with a HR or a people leader over, I don't know, 6 months. And we talk about the things that they need to change, and often people want me to come in and be the catalyst, or else they're like, oh, can you help us? So here, these are three things. I mean, there are more than three, but these for me are the three most prevalent things. And the first one is bad strategy. And by bad strategy, what do I mean by that? Like, it's confusing, it's unachievable, it doesn't really exist. I worked with one organization, and I said, oh, can you send me your strategy? I was signing non-disclosure agreements, so I don't share any of this stuff. And they sent me their strategy, and it was like 6 pages. And I went back, I was like, oh, hey, listen, thanks so much. Really appreciate the high level document. Listen, if you could send it me in a bit more detail, it would just enable me to have a look at your goals, your objectives, what the planned operating model is. And they came back and they were like, yeah, that's it. I was like, okay. So I've identified the first root cause. It just wasn't enough. Like, if this was a startup, right? And often when I work with startups, there's not a lot of strategy there, and I understand it, but there's enough to get going. There's usually a really, really good idea from which can generate energy, ideas, build a culture to deliver a good product. But this was a pretty big company. It was a multi-million-dollar revenue company, and they just didn't have enough strategy. And so I think that's the first problem. That's one of the elements of bad strategy is just isn't enough there that really articulates it in a way where people can go, all right, I get where we're going. We need to agree how we're going to get there, but at least I've got a sense of where we're going. It's organized, it's structured. I understand the objectives. They're in line with my view of the organization. They're in line with the stuff that we've been doing, let's say, over the last 5 years. That's one of the big issues, actually, with Meta. So this is the company that owns Facebook. And if you remember about, I don't know, feels like 3-4 years ago now, Mark Zuckerberg came out very, very publicly, talked about the metaverse. Remember that? I think I might have talked about this recently, the good old metaverse. Anyway, cut a long story short, he made a strategy all about the metaverse. Now, at the end of last year, it might have been the beginning of this year, they surveyed staff on their confidence in the Meta leadership team. And what they found was only 26%, so just slightly over a quarter of staff surveyed said they had confidence in the Meta leadership team. How bad is that? Just over a quarter. And less than half felt valued by the organization. And a lot of that is to do with, now I spoke to one former Facebook senior manager earlier this year, and part of the problem was the metaverse strategy. And he said, he's like, people are confused. People that don't know, he said, it seems like it's Mark's pet project and that he's pouring billions into this, as he's wont to do, don't get me wrong, like as the owner of the company and, having changed all of the voting rights to make sure he gets what he wants. See, I started off positive and then went deeply cynical, and that was totally intentional. But, he's quite within his rights. Since, if it's his company, that's what he wants to do, I suppose. But basically, this guy was saying to me, he's like, we're confused. We don't really understand what our direction is. That's the strategy, right? We don't understand what our direction is. And so as a result, we don't really get where we're going. And he flipped, really, Mark Zuckerberg, earlier this year. And it all of a sudden, it became about killing Twitter. Have you got your Threads account set up yet? Have you done that yet? I've got one. I've started posting stuff on there. It seems a happier place, which is nice. And Twitter's a more of a toxic place. But, I mean, Twitter's not toxic, but the people who are on it are, which makes Twitter toxic by default. So it is toxic. All right. Took myself out of that. But yeah, so I think that's a big reason why people have lost confidence in the leadership team, is they just don't understand strategically where they're going. And if your strategy's not right, or if your goals are unachievable, your operating model. So your operating model is things like structure and pay and process. Governance is another part of the operating model. So kind of how the organization kind of is set up to deliver the strategy. Obviously, the culture piece is the how we deliver on the operating model to achieve the strategy. So bad strategy, that's the first way that cultures can stagnate. The second way that I've seen a lot of is selfish employees. Now, don't be offended. I'm not talking about... Actually, I might be talking about you here. We just don't know. We just don't know. Now, what do I mean by selfish employees? Now, the first kind of selfish employee is the one that doesn't want to share any information about the thing that they do with anybody else for whatever reason. Sometimes we call it patch protection. Sometimes they don't want to share it. They don't want to tell anybody else. But for me, more that they don't want to help coach and support other people. I did some work with an athletics organization, and I spoke to one of the coaches, and I got him to talk to me about his style of coaching, all of these kind of things, the standard things you would do as part of culture. And I asked him the question with regards to athletes, and he said, athletes it's very individual, but what we're trying to do is create a team. And of course it is. It's like, you take something like Formula One, it's very individual. The driver's got to be single-minded, focused. They've got to be technically good at what they do, and they've got to keep their emotion in check. It's the same if you're an athlete too, right? He said, but what we're looking to do within the organization is create a more, I can't remember collegiate. I think he used the word collegiate. He said, where we all help each other. And he told me about this one specific athlete who wouldn't help his or her teammates. Things like nutrition, things like about training, things about mindset, those kinds of things. And so that for me was one good example. I remember speaking to one guy when I was at a permanent job, and he went to great lengths to tell me that when I started, not to change his job because that's his pension fund and he retires in 3 years. I was like, yeah, Mick, that's not how business works. You've got to contribute to the team. It's not all about you and your pension or your super fund. So there's a bit of practice protection. Listen, we're seeing a little bit of it for office workers. I wrote about office workers recently and about how hybrid is the kind of new privilege, and the fact that 80% of people who in the workforce now can't work hybrid. I don't think there's enough empathy around people demanding where they want to work. And so this is the thing, is you've got people at the minute who are like, I don't want to commute on a Monday. It's just like, well, if that's what the team needs, because some things are best done face to face, then you kind of got to do that. I don't want to turn my camera on. Well, actually, if we're spending some time building relationships, maybe you have to think that it's not just about you. So, this is what I mean by kind of selfish employees, is people who want to do what they want to do with no thought to the team. And eventually it just erodes the culture, and people are like, well, if they're going to do it, I'm going to do it. Do you know what I mean? I'm making them sound really bad. Actually, they're really selfish, and they should stop doing that. So essentially what they're doing is creating conditions for them and them alone. They're only interested in personal success. Now, organizations, you really got to think about how you set targets. Because if you said key performance indicators, what are your key performance indicators? They're largely done on an individual basis. It's like, we need more teamwork. Great. Have you got KPIs? Yeah, start there. Set team goals and team objectives, not individual. Because if you make about the individual, I'm going to be like, right, have I achieved my targets? Because that's what I need to do. I'm doing all of the accents today. So yes, you've really got to think about, if you want to move out of this kind of stagnant culture, well, you've got to help employees to see that it's not about them, it's about the team. Sometimes they need to be told. At that state, you create a little bit of a combatant culture, but then your goal is to involve them in the process of what good looks like, and that's how you get to vibrant. So that's the second. So bad strategy is number one, selfish employees number two. The third way that cultures stagnate is just communication is rubbish. It's just rubbish. Like people misuse technology. Someone has asked me to do a thing on email, so I'll do that next. I'll do that the next Culture and Coffee, talk about email. But misusing technology, it's not just about email. Email has been proven to be the worst form of communication, and yet it's the most prevalent in office-based cultures. Ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And another good example, that sporting organization that I worked with, the senior management or the leadership team there demanded that coaches enter information into a database, and they handled it in the wrong way. Listen, I told them this, right? They handled it in the wrong way because they told coaches to do it, and it became mandatory. And I think as soon as you make anything mandatory, you invite a little bit of fear, and people can also check out and go, well, if you tell me to do it, I'm not doing it. The inner child comes out. But I think the thing is with this is they didn't involve the coaches in what information should we be capturing, what's a good way to track nutrition, what's a good way to track routine, what's a good way to track injuries. There was one other thing. Did I say fitness routines or the routines and the evolution of those? Anyway, so they didn't involve me in all that. So they ended up having to, weight was the other thing. Were in order, I was talking about running, they had to be in an optimal weight between these two weight bands. So it was about getting the nutrition right in order to make sure they were the optimum weight or something like that. But they ended up having to fill in a bunch of other fields because that's the way the system, or because obviously the way they sell the system is they sell you a vanilla version, and then, every change costs $1 million or whatever it is. And so they didn't involve the coaches, so they ended up spending way too much time entering information in this database, which they didn't need to. And so consequently, the culture stagnated over time because, people just kind of became apathetic towards the use of technology. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing it in this way? They raised objections, or they were quite positive about the way that they went about it, but it all fell on deaf ears. And so consequently, the culture stagnated. So communication, as in the way that the information gets passed between one person to another. Or for me, another way is where you just don't create enough space for conversation, discussion, or challenge. I think that's another way cultures stagnate, is everything's a diktat. This is the way we do it. And as soon as you work with the culture, it's like, oh, this is the way we do things around here, and you have to conform. People are like, okay, I'll conform. But at that stage, what you've done is drained the culture of all creativity, really. All opportunity for employees to shape what the culture needs to become. You end up in this never-ending cycle of agreeing to disagree, which is just rubbish. And agreeing to disagree, again, it doesn't become toxic because you never really have it out. It just stagnates, and people are like, okay. And at that point, even if you ask people for their opinion, they just don't give them. They go, yeah, whatever you say is the right thing. So there are just three ways in which culture can stagnate, and of course you can address them all. Of course you can, but they're just three warning signs that, if you start to see some of those things, if those things are prevalent within your organization, then you really do need to take action. These things never ever correct themselves. They never right themselves. Even if you made changes to a system in the way that you exchange information, it just doesn't change overnight. You've got to really involve people in a process such that you increase the engagement. People understand the value to them and the value to the organization, and you're both committed to future success. That's your Culture and Coffee podcast for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I look forward to chatting to you next time. Ta-ra for now.